supposed to announce if you have any percussionists, drummers in here, you need to excuse yourself to get ready for team walk. I think we already have the need, but just making sure you need to start going. All right, and I have the distinct honor of introducing our guest speaker today. Literally, the first day as I was officially working in this role, we had a meeting about Band Parents Weekend. And so the very beginning in this role, I was thinking, who's going to be our speaker? And I began praying about this, and I just kept coming back to this same person. And for the reasons I'm going to read to you in this introduction. Mr. Matthew McDonald has spent most of his life in vocational ministry, about 22 years. I wouldn't say that's most of your life, but a good portion of it.
I'm only 28.
And really, since 2011, though, God changed his path. He's not in full-time ministry currently, but he does serve at Thomas Road in the adult ministry. And for the last 10 years, he's been working in sales, and most recently as a real estate appraiser. And probably the most significant thing, and one of the reasons that kept coming back to me, is I've known the McDonald family for a while because I had Erin as an advanced student at LCA. And I've gotten to know her parents deeply through that process. And I remember having multiple conversations with Mr. McDonald on the side just about life and about band and about teaching. And I just admired both he and Julie for their parental successes that I view, because I've seen and heard of the reputation of his other kids. And I don't know if you know this, but Erin is their 4th student in the Spirit of the Mountain Marching Band. And not only that, Erin is the 4th field commander in the Spirit of the Mountain Marching Band that are their kids. That is truly remarkable. And I don't think you didn't include that specifically in your introduction, but I think that's really notable, because as a parent that I'm watching how to be a parent myself, I've got 2 teenage sons. What are they doing to have successful students? And so, again, I know his heart is not that at all, but I think it bears mentioning. And so I just appreciate your leadership and the mentoring that you've been just as a parent. And so what better person to have speak to a parent's weekend is a parent. And so if you would, just give him your attention as he comes and shares what God's laid on his heart. Mr. Matthew McDonald.
I will say, when I first got the email from Dr. Seid inviting me to speak, and having been to a lot of these events over the years and having heard a lot of really good speakers, my first thought was, did you send it by accident? But later that evening at dinner, I was sitting there with my wife, Julie, and I said, you're not going to believe Dr. Seid emailed me and asked me to speak at the Band Parents Weekend, and her immediate response was, are you sure? Let me And after some pretty heavy-duty forensic analysis of the email, we decided with a pretty high degree of certainty, about a 96%, 0.3% chance that you did invite me to speak. But before I get a little too far along into this, I thought I would ask you, did you indeed mean to invite me? Just want to make sure for the record. Julie, make note of that. Just kidding. As Dr. Seid mentioned, Julie and I have 4 children. Our 3 oldest all graduated from Liberty. Our youngest, Erin, is a sophomore here at the university. All 3 were in the marching band all 4 years, and only one of them was actually a music major, which I know a lot of times parents think, well, my kid's not a music major, really should they be in the marching band? But they loved every moment of it. And as I think back to when our oldest kids left our home and came to the university, it was a little bit bittersweet. And honestly, though, I think your first child going off is the hardest, because you just don't know what to expect emotionally when they leave your home. Although I will say, when our older kids were younger, say middle school, high school, I would tell them often that as their dad, my goal, my hope, my dream for them one day is to go away. I want you to go away. Now, you can come back. You can come back at some point, but just make sure you bring grandchildren. That's your ticket to get back in. But anyway, I can still remember when we brought our oldest daughter, Erin, to start her freshman year here at the university. In the beginning of our very first band camp here. And I can remember friends telling us, it's going to be tough. You take that first child to college, that day when you say goodbye, you get in that car, it's going to be hard. But, that weekend was really busy, that first weekend. There wasn't a whole lot of time to think about all the emotions and everything that was going on. And as we came to that last day, we were there, we were leaving early Sunday evening. We had just had an early dinner. And after eating, we were all kind of standing in the parking lot, actually the Moe's down here on Ward's Road. And I remember just thinking, this isn't so bad. I mean, I'm keeping it all together until Julie said, let's pray for Becca before we go. Well, that's all it took. I got about a sentence or two into that prayer, and we all started crying like babies with a bad diaper rash. It was terrible. And maybe some of you parents can relate to that shedding of tears, but maybe yours were tears of joy. I don't. Only you know that in your heart, really, between you and the Lord, whether those tears of joy or pain. But anyways, as hard as it was to leave our daughter Becca that day, I think the one thing that gave Julie and me comfort was knowing that Becca would be in a place like Liberty with the support of this marching band family. And in many ways, I feel like this band was so instrumental. It was really a catalyst that God used to grow our children spiritually. And now, as many of you know, each year there's a new spiritual emphasis in the band. And this year it's Brave Faith with Daniel as the central biblical figure. And I think in many ways, Daniel is so appropriate because of his background, a young man that was basically taken from the comfort of his home and exiled to a place that was very new and very different, and just thinking about how he handled those trials that he faced. Now we know that Daniel was taken by Nebuchadnezzar in that first wave of exiles to Babylon. And most scholars think that Daniel was probably late teens when he left his home, about the age that many of you as freshmen would come to Liberty. And now, for the record, I just want you to know, I'm not equating Liberty to Babylon or Dr. Sight to Nebuchadnezzar. Although during band camp, maybe you felt that way. I don't really know. It's kind of hot out there sometimes. I do think there is some correlation and some basic biblical principles that as students, and especially certainly as parents, that we can apply to our own lives as we reflect on Daniel and how he really managed to flourish during some really extremely difficult circumstances in his life. I think the first thing is we know that Daniel was not alone. And obviously the Lord was always with him. But we see that God provided Daniel really a small group of close friends, three in particular, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the Bible tells us that this group of four friends, they were exceptional in their wisdom and understanding in every manner. So God knew that Daniel needed this close group of friends, especially when he first brought him to Babylon. Now, as I think about Daniel, I think it would be very easy for him to have been angry or bitter with God because, think about the fact that here he is, exiled from the promised land. It would be easy for many of those exiles to think that God had turned their back, that God had abandoned them. And in that day and time, when one nation defeated another nation, sort of the prevailing thought was, well, our God is stronger than your God. So it would be easy for those exiles to think, well, maybe our God's not all who he said he really is, and to abandon their faith, to abandon their God and to go a different path. And certainly Daniel could have done that. But God gave him this godly group of friends to keep him moving forward spiritually. And these are the same three friends that one day would defy the edict of Nebuchadnezzar and refuse to bow to that golden idol. And we also know that there come a time when Daniel, too, would have to stand alone. But for now, God had given him this close group of friends to encourage him. So the first question I want to present to our students here today is, who's in your closest circle of friends? Specifically, what kind of friends are they? Are they friends that are moving you closer to Christ? Are they helping you move forward positively in your faith journey? And more importantly, what kind of friend are you? Are you the kind of friend that's encouraging others around you to draw near to Christ, to continue moving forward in their faith journey? You know, the second thing that we see that God gave Daniel is he gave him a wise and discerning spirit. And we see in that very first chapter of the book of Daniel, Daniel demonstrating these qualities. We see how Daniel, he accepted some aspects of the Babylonian culture, like the language and the training for his position in government, but other aspects he didn't accept, did he? He refused some types of food. And later on, we see that he refused to obey the decree to pray to no one other than the king for 30 days. We see Daniel exhibiting an incredible quality, the ability to think critically, and that's so important in a culture that does not honor God, that does not recognize the Lord as the true and living God. And I can tell you, in our culture today, we need more people that have that ability to think critically. But the foundation of that critical thinking really is wisdom and discernment. And we see with Daniel, that wasn't by accident that he gained that. That wasn't just some natural gift that he was born with. That was a God-given wisdom that he was given during that time. So we see how God gave him that wisdom. And I believe that wisdom that Daniel possessed really was the result of a close relationship with the Lord that he cultivated regularly and primarily through prayer. If you read the book of Daniel, you see some amazing prayers by Daniel. And I'll tell you, students, some of the hardest decisions that you'll ever be faced with is not having to choose between an overtly bad thing and an overtly good thing. Oftentimes, it's choosing between two good things. So are you developing that skill of critical thinking? And remember, the foundation of that ability to think critically is God's wisdom, that discernment that can only come through spending time in prayer and reading God's Word. So we see Daniel had a solid group of godly friends, that he was a person of prayer, that he had wisdom and discernment, that he demonstrated critical thinking, that God gave him the ability to take God's truth and apply it to everyday situations and circumstances. But I think there's also something else that was just as important in Daniel's life. And to be honest with you, this didn't even occur to me until maybe a day or two after Dr. Sype had invited me to speak. And as I began to think about Daniel and the faith that he exhibited and the type of life he led, my first thought was, what about Daniel's parents? What about Daniel's parents? Now, I went to seminary. I spent over 20 years in ministry. I've literally heard hundreds and hundreds of sermons, and I can't remember anybody ever saying anything about the parents of Daniel. Now, I mean, one of the reasons that may be is because the book of Daniel doesn't mention Daniel's parents. As best as I could tell, there's nowhere else in the Bible when Daniel's parents are mentioned. Now, we know that they were most likely part of the ruling class in the nation, because we remember Daniel was part of that first wave that was taken into Babylon, and those folks were part of that ruling class. But I began to wonder, what kind of character did Daniel's parents possess? What level of faith did they possess in the true and living God? I began to wonder, as parents, what kind of truths did they instill in Daniel as a child? What kind of example, as Daniel grew into adulthood, what kind of example did they leave for him as parents? Now we know that Daniel had great character and integrity. We know that. We see it, we read it in the book of Daniel. Now it's possible that his parents did not possess that same degree of integrity, that same level of character. While it's possible, honestly, I don't believe it's probable. I believe that they also had a vibrant faith in God and followed him wholeheartedly. I wonder, did they know the extraordinary things that Daniel did, how he stood so faithfully in the face of extremely difficult circumstances? Honestly, we don't know. Maybe they would have been surprised at what their teenage son accomplished. I mean, how many of us as parents, and I think about my kids when they were in middle school, high school, just thinking, Lord, what in the wide, wide world of sports are you going to do with these kids? And maybe they thought the same thing. Maybe they thought the same thing. Maybe they had no idea what Daniel was capable of doing with God's help. Maybe they wondered, would Daniel stay faithful to the Lord while he's in exile? Maybe they worried that Daniel might cast aside his faith in the true and living God for the false gods of Babylon. And honestly, that's not so far-fetched. I mean, remember why they were exiled to begin with. Generation after generation of the nation of Israel had corporately turned their backs on God to the point where God said, finally, enough. And they were sent into exile. So we have all these unanswered questions. We don't know really how his parents responded or what they did. But there's one thing I feel certain of. If they would have been so proud of Daniel, they would have been, as parents, so proud. And who among us as parents would not have been proud to have a child like Daniel? Who among us would not be proud? So I think the question for us as parents today the question isn't, do we trust our children to pursue God and to remain faithful? The question is, do we trust our God to complete the good work He has started? Now, to our students, our children, as a dad, even to his own daughter, Erin, I would say to you, remember Daniel. Remember, even as a young man, how Daniel, through wisdom and discernment and just a great group of friends around him, how he accepted some things like the training and the language, but other things he didn't. Like some of the different types of food and the command not to pray. And it's in Daniel's life we see him showing us at different points that we all at some point have to draw a line and make a stand for the Lord. Sometimes, hopefully, that will be with those around us helping us make that stand. But there may come a time when you have to stand alone, just like Daniel had to stand alone at times. Now, I'm going to make an assumption that all the students in this room this morning, that you voluntarily chose to come to Liberty University. That you weren't exiled or deported here like Daniel was exiled or deported to Babylon. That when you came to this university for the first time, you saw something different and special about this place. And I believe, in my heart, I believe Liberty is an extraordinary place. And that God is active and very real here. But we need to remind ourselves, God is not confined to Christian colleges and Christian universities and churches. I want you to remember, think Daniel, placed by God in the heart of pagan, godless Babylon. Think how God humbled Nebuchadnezzar, at that time the greatest man in history, and reminded Nebuchadnezzar there's only one being that controls this world and you're not it. So if nothing else, Daniel shows us that God is actively guiding and orchestrating all things in this world, not just the Christian aspects of our life. And although it may not seem like it at times in this world, that God is in control, Jesus is just as much in control on the campus of an Ivy League university as he is here at Liberty University. So students, God has placed you here for a season with this incredible group of friends to grow and to strengthen your faith so that one day, when you leave this wonderful university with all of its encouragement and all of its support, that God can use you, just like Daniel, to positively impact your circle of influence for Him. So students, here's my final question. If you're not living for Christ now, if you're not making a stand for Christ in a place like Liberty, with all the support and all the friendships and all the encouragement, how will you stand for Him when you leave this place? My prayer for you is that you will not take this place or these people or this season in your life for granted. That you'll become a Daniel to your generation. God bless you. Thank you.